What if the most dangerous weapon in America today isn't a gun, but an idea? September 10th, 2025. Charlie Kirk is shot live on stage, but that bullet was fired long before. It began in memes, in mobs, in millions of quiet clicks. This isn't a story about one man. It's a story about all of us and the invisible shot we've all helped load. A bullet is never just a bullet. It carries with it decades of frustration, unspoken fears, radicalized echo chambers, and the toxic belief that eliminating someone is the same as defeating their ideas. Charlie Kirk wasn't the first controversial figure to be shot on American soil. But something about this moment felt different, not because of who he was, but because of how expected it felt. The warning signs weren't subtle. Online death threats, ideological mobs, an internet that feeds off polarization like oxygen. When that trigger was pulled, it wasn't just one man's act. It was the culmination of a culture that refuses to listen and would rather destroy than debate. That bullet flew on the winds of a national sickness, the glorification of outrage, and the slow death of empathy.
There was a time when disagreement in America meant discussion, not destruction. But that time is over. Today, every election feels like a war, every conversation a landmine, every opinion a potential death sentence. And behind it all, a society addicted to outrage, powered by algorithms that reward the loudest voice, not the wisest one. This isn't politics anymore. It's tribalism wrapped in red and blue. When the other side becomes the enemy, compromise is betrayal. And when disagreement is equated with danger, violence becomes inevitable. Nietzsche saw it coming. He wrote that resentment is the revenge of the weak. And in America, we've created a system where weakness is never admitted, but always acted upon.
Friedrich Nietzsche didn't believe evil came from power. He believed it came from powerlessness, from the slow, bitter accumulation of envy, the kind that festers in silence, then erupts in violence. He called it resentment. It's what happens when someone feels too small to rise, so they pull others down instead. They don't seek to create something better. They want to erase what makes them feel inferior. Not justice, but vengeance disguised as justice. And that's where America stands today. We've built an entire political culture around resentment. We reward victimhood, but punish strength. We confuse offense with oppression, and we've built ideologies not to uplift, but to attack. Every tweet, every slogan, every violent act is a manifestation of Nietzsche's warning. When people stop building, they start burning.
Once, being a victim meant surviving something horrific. Now, it means having power. In modern America, victimhood is currency, and the more oppressed you can appear, the more authority you claim. But here's the twist. When everyone fights to be the most hurt, no one is truly healing. We've turned pain into a weapon and outrage into influence. This distortion doesn't unite, it fractures. People begin to see strength as a threat. Achievement is viewed with suspicion. And anyone who dares to rise above the crowd is labeled privileged, dangerous, or worse, a symbol of oppression. Nietzsche warned that when morality is built on resentment, it no longer seeks truth, it seeks control. And in a culture where victimhood gives you a louder voice than virtue, even bullets can be fired in the name of justice. America was built on the promise of equality, not sameness, but opportunity. But somewhere along the way, we confused equal rights with equal outcomes. Now anyone who stands out becomes a target, not because they did wrong, but because they did well. What began as a noble fight for fairness has morphed into a cultural crusade against difference. If someone has more money, more influence, more followers, we don't ask why, we ask how to bring them down. It's no longer about lifting people up, it's about pulling people back. Nietzsche would call this the morality of the herd, where success is shameful and strength is a sin. It's a world where people don't want to become better, they just want to make sure no one else is better than them. And in that world, a bullet doesn't just kill a man. It kills the very idea that anyone has the right to rise.
Democracy is supposed to be noisy, but not like this. Not where every conversation is a confrontation. Not where every disagreement is a declaration of war. In today's America, we don't argue to understand, we argue to destroy. Social media rewards humiliation, not persuasion. Cable news turns discussion into blood sport. And the average citizen? He stops listening and starts picking sides, not based on truth, but on tribal loyalty. Nietzsche believed that when people lose faith in reason, they fall back on instincts, rage, fear, vengeance. We are there now. The marketplace of ideas has become a battlefield, and the only thing louder than the shouting is the silence of those too afraid to speak. And so the nation grows angrier, lonelier, more volatile, until one day the scream becomes a shot.
Words are no longer just expressions, they're ammunition. A tweet can incite more destruction than a fist. A slogan can justify a killing. We've entered an era where language itself has become weaponized. Online, outrage spreads faster than facts. Insults trend higher than insight. And every post is a potential spark in a country soaked with gasoline. It's not a question of if someone will snap, but when. Nietzsche understood this danger. He warned that in a culture stripped of shared values, language becomes a mask, not for truth, but for power. And when power is built on fear, speech doesn't heal, it provokes. When someone pulls the trigger, we call it violence. But when thousands cheer on their digital platforms with dehumanizing language, isn't that just a slower kind of murder? Justice is a powerful word, maybe the most powerful. But when it's twisted by resentment, it becomes a mask for revenge. In today's climate, it's no longer about fairness, it's about punishment. Not about restoring balance, but tipping the scales just enough to hurt the other side. And we tell ourselves it's justice, so we can sleep at night. Nietzsche warned, "He who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises." And that's what we see now. People who feel powerless, trying to reclaim meaning through destruction. Smashing systems, silencing voices, pulling triggers. Not to build something new, but to feel something real. But there is no justice in annihilation, only ashes. And in the ruins, the question echoes, what have we truly won if we have to burn the world to get it?
There's something ancient in us, something tribal. When we feel pain, we want someone to blame. When we feel powerless, we want someone to fall.
And in that moment, truth no longer matters, only blood does. Crowds don't seek nuance, they seek spectacle. The louder the fall, the more satisfying the hit. And the media? They feed it, package it, sell it. Because in a society addicted to outrage, tragedy is profitable. Nietzsche saw this hunger in every revolution. He knew that when a people lose their grip on meaning, they turn to violence not because of what they hate, but because of how empty they feel. That's why assassinations like Charlie Kirk's don't come out of nowhere. They come from us. From a public so starved for catharsis, we mistake death for justice.
In the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination, the cameras didn't blink. They zoomed in. They replayed the footage. They dissected his last words, analyzed the crowd's reaction, and then moved on to the next outrage. Because in modern America, collapse isn't just a tragedy, it's content. The media doesn't manufacture the violence, but it markets it. They turn real pain into political narrative, real blood into ideological currency. And every victim becomes either a martyr or a monster, depending on which channel you watch. Nietzsche warned us, madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, it is the rule. And today, the media doesn't just report the madness, they organize it, narrate it, monetize it. We're not just witnessing a spectacle, we are the audience and the product. The man who pulls the trigger is rarely a monster. He's more often a mirror, reflecting back the rage, fear, and hopelessness we've all let fester. He doesn't wake up wanting to kill, he wakes up feeling invisible. And in a society that rewards attention over purpose, sometimes the only way to be seen is to do something unforgettable. Nietzsche spoke of the will to power, the human drive to assert meaning in a meaningless world. When that drive is denied, it mutates. It becomes rage. And for some, violence becomes the final, desperate attempt to feel significant. So when Charlie Kirk was shot, the bullet didn't just come from a gun. It came from a psyche starved of meaning, in a culture that teaches us, if you can't rise, destroy.
America was once a country driven by dreams, freedom, progress, self-made purpose. But when those dreams fade and people can no longer find meaning in building, they begin to find it in burning. This is nihilism, the belief that nothing matters, so anything goes. It creeps in slowly through broken systems, betrayed hopes, and empty promises. And when it takes root, destruction becomes the only act that feels real. Nietzsche feared this moment. He saw it not as chaos, but as clarity in despair. When people lose faith in God, government, community, and even themselves, they reach for anything that gives them weight, even if it's a weapon. The tragedy isn't just the loss of life. It's the loss of belief that anything good can still be built without blood.
Everyone wants to fix the system, but no one wants to fix themselves. We protest, vote, cancel, scream, but when the noise dies down, we're still lost inside. Nietzsche believed that true revolution doesn't start in the streets, it starts in the soul. Not in tearing down institutions, but in confronting your own emptiness. Only a person who has faced their own darkness can walk through a broken world without adding to the fire. But that kind of growth is hard. It doesn't trend. It doesn't go viral. Because it asks something no movement can do for you.
to become more than a victim, and more than just angry. Before we rebuild America, we have to rebuild Americans, not with slogans, but with strength, meaning, and the courage to create, not just destroy.
In a twisted irony, weakness has become a source of authority. Not the honest kind, the kind that demands compassion, but a weaponized fragility used to silence shame and control. Victimhood now grants moral superiority. Those who cry loudest are believed fastest. And strength? It's labeled toxic, oppressive, dangerous, as if stability itself were a threat. Nietzsche feared this inversion. He saw it as the collapse of virtue, when we no longer strive to be strong, but instead demand that others become weak with us, not to elevate the fallen, but to level the ground. In this new cult, progress is punished, resilience is resented, and we're left asking, who leads a world where no one is allowed to stand tall?
The mob doesn't need a reason. It needs a spark. And when it finds someone strong, someone visible, someone unafraid, it lights the match. Today, those who rise are expected to apologize, to tone down, to step back. Not because they've done wrong, but because they've done too well. The strong must be softened, the brave muted, the exceptional reduced. Nietzsche called this slave morality, a mindset that glorifies the low not because it loves justice, but because it hates greatness. The mob doesn't seek fairness, it seeks control through collapse. So they burn the strong, not to build the weak, but to ensure no one reminds them of what they could be.
Every society creates its own demons, and often they look a lot like us, just darker, angrier, more honest about the hatred we pretend not to feel. We ask, how could someone shoot Charlie Kirk? But the real question is, how many of us secretly wanted him to fall and just didn't pull the trigger ourselves? The shooter was just the hand, but the culture was the architect. The applause after his death, the memes, the mockery, they reveal something horrifying. We are not spectators of the monster. We are part of its making. Nietzsche didn't just warn about fighting monsters. He warned about what happens when we enjoy watching them die.
Real strength isn't domination, it's creation. It's the quiet, relentless work of building something better when everyone else is tearing things down. But in a culture addicted to outrage, creators are dangerous. They don't follow scripts, they don't need permission, and worst of all, they remind people that meaning is still possible. Nietzsche believed in this kind of strength, not the loud power of tyrants, but the inner force of those who build despite the ruins. Those who say, I won't burn this world, I'll rebuild it. That's the new revolution, not rage, not revenge, but the refusal to kneel before the void.
The bullet that killed Charlie Kirk made a sound. But there was another shot, one far more dangerous, that no one heard. It wasn't fired by a gun. It was fired by a culture that stopped listening, stopped thinking, and started aiming at itself. This invisible shot was years in the making. It came from every dehumanizing tweet, every lazy stereotype, every cheer for someone's downfall because they thought differently. And so the blame isn't just his killer, it's ours. Not because we pulled the trigger, but because we loaded the chamber, because we fed the machine that makes murder feel justified. Nietzsche left us a final warning. The abyss is not what you fall into. It's what stares back when you look too long. America has looked too long, and the abyss has blinked. We asked, who pulled the trigger? But the harder question is, why did we let it get this far? And more importantly, what are we going to do before it happens again?